Thank you so much, Volker, and thank you for the Plamadiso community for having me. Yeah, so this is a joint work with Richard Haans at the Erasmus University in Rotterdam. This is very much work in progress, so I do hope you'll stick around for the Q&A after the presentation, because I'd love to hear your thoughts and comments on the project. So the title is Too Close to the Sun, Antecedents and Implications of Being Compared by Information Intermediaries. And so broadly, this work is about information intermediaries, such as certification bodies, award bodies, expert critics, you name it. There's quite some research on these information intermediaries, but it's quite scattered across different subfields in management and economics and marketing. And so we'll try to tie that a little bit together. But we're specifically interested in one specific phenomenon that we often observe in markets where information intermediaries are active. And I'll give you some examples of what we mean, what we're interested in. So here's a review for a video game called Strafe, and the reviewer writes, especially after Devil Daggers recently showed us how important sound can be to threat awareness, it's strange that this similarly old school game didn't follow suit. So the critic in this review for the game Strafe compares the game to another game, Devil's Daggers, and apparently Strafe didn't do something that Devil's Daggers did quite well. And so here's another example, which is for the album Dawn FM by the pop star The Weeknd, where the reviewer writes, Dawn FM is no thriller by Michael Jackson by any means, but it's a solid chapter in the story of an artist who continues to unabashedly defy expectations, and ultimately we're lucky to be along for the ride. So Dawn FM apparently is quite a good album, but it doesn't quite match the status that Thriller has by Michael Jackson. And so here's a third example for the movie The Woman King, where the reviewer writes, the subplots in The Woman King might undo it for some, but the magnitude and the awe of this movie inspires are what epics like Gladiator and Braveheart are all about. So The Woman King apparently is quite an epic movie, and in that sense, it compares to Gladiator and Braveheart. And then finally, last example for an app, Chefling, which is a kitchen companion app, I think is what the category is called. And the reviewer here, Gabriel Zamora, says, like Yumly, Chefling suggests recipes based on these preferences, which is useful if you're trying to avoid certain foods or are targeting a specific diet. So again, the app is compared to another app within the same category, and in this case, it's quite similar. So broadly, what we're interested in this study is who gets compared, why do they get compared, who did they get compared to, and what are the implications of being compared? And giving a little teaser of the findings, what we're seeing is, well, if you're quite similar to some other products, you might be at higher risk of getting compared, but typically those other products tend to be really good products, and therefore it will be quite difficult to succeed them. And so on balance, these comparisons tend to be negative for the product that's being compared. So we're positioning this in kind of the general research on information intermediaries, both within an organization theory and strategic management. There is increasing attention for kind of the importance and the role of information intermediaries. There is a really great Academy of Annals review paper that just came out by Amanda Sharkey and Greta Su and Balázs Kovács, and kind of the notion is we quite know that they're important, but there's still a lot that we don't know about information intermediaries, and so that's kind of what we're connecting with our study. So intermediaries play a crucial role in helping consumers discover, make sense of new product offerings by rating, ranking, certifying, and otherwise publicly evaluating these offerings. And I will say that in some markets, these information intermediaries play a greater role than in others, and particularly in markets for experience and credence goods, such as cultural products, these information intermediaries play a really big role because typically, there are a lot of competitors in those markets, and B, it might be difficult for consumers to evaluate products prior to actually consuming them. And so they might turn to these intermediaries, which hopefully are, at least to a great degree, independent, and they will read whatever these intermediaries have to say and help them make a decision. And so therefore, intermediaries are also critically important to producers. And there's significant research out there, particularly in marketing and economics, that shows that reviewer reports and reviewer scores both predict and influence consumers' decision making. So there's some studies that establish that there's a causal effect between how critics and other types of information intermediaries rank products and subsequently how consumers make their decisions. So this is an important audience member, if you will, in the broader industries in which these firms are active. So we are specifically interested in these comparisons by intermediaries, and as I've shown at the top of the presentation, these comparisons are quite ubiquitous. Many intermediaries use comparisons, and we believe that they help consumers better understand the product in terms of its salient features, its style, its theme, its product characteristics, and so forth. Right? It can really help position or place a product in the minds of reviewers when the critic compares it to another product that may or may not be similar. And again, so these comparisons are especially important in markets where quality is difficult to ascertain a priori, and when there are many offerings available. Consumers might not quite know what they're getting themselves into, and also there will be a lot of alternatives available to choose from. And so having a critic or a reviewer position a product by comparing it to another could be quite helpful. Just to clarify, these comparisons are different from rankings and ratings. So again, they're more qualitative in nature, so they're not intended to provide an overall ordering of a market category. And they're also not often based on quantifiable information. They're much rather about kind of the characteristics and the look and feel of the product. And they're also different from social comparisons. This is not something that's done by the producers themselves, or something that's really centered on the self-enhancement of the critic. It's something that the critic does to kind of alleviate some of the uncertainty that the consumer faces. So we are interested in a number of questions relating these comparisons, which I will highlight for you here, and then I'll also quickly kind of tap into what might be the tension, at least in our views, with regards to these questions. So first, we're interested in which offerings get compared by evaluators. So who's being compared? And we think that, evaluators, such as expert critics, they might be more likely to compare two products when they are similar and compete in the same market. Yet, obviously, the informational value of making a comparison will be greater for products that are highly novel and innovative, products that might be more difficult for consumers to make sense of. So the benefits to consumers of drawing comparisons will be greater for highly novel products for which there exist fewer reference. So again, it might be easier for a reviewer to compare a product that is highly similar to another, but there might be more value for consumers in making a comparison for a highly novel product for which there exist fewer reference. And that brings me to the second question. So which offerings get selected when a comparison is made? On the one hand, it might be likely that comparisons will be made to prior successful offerings. There's a lot of information in making such comparisons because both the evaluator and the consumer will be likely to know or have heard of these prior successful offerings. But it could also be the case that comparisons are made to kind of current offerings that are direct rivals of the product that is being evaluated. And this will allow the critic as well as the consumer to better rank competing products that are going on, that are competing at the same time. So there's a bit of a trade-off there, but we believe that I don't know why my slides are automatically skipping to the next one. I think Volker might be controlling my slide deck here. Stop doing that. So, you know, there's research that shows that evaluators themselves are also quite risk averse and strategic in the decisions they make, in the products that they review. And so there might be a downside to comparing against current competitors. And that downside for the evaluator is twofold. First of all, current competitors, we might not fully understand yet what their true quality is and kind of what their true identity as a product is. And so the evaluator might think that it's in the interest of the products as well as themselves to kind of give that product a little bit more time and rather compare against products that were released in the past. And then there's a second argument to be made here, and that is the evaluator obviously relies on advertising income, typically from the very products that they're reviewing. And so by comparing products that are currently competing, they might be at risk of interfering with the competitive dynamics. And so they might be more inclined to compare against a product that was released in the past. And so the last question that we're interested in is, what are the implications of comparisons for evaluation and performance? Comparisons can result in a focal product being perceived as similar to the referent. And we can imagine that, you know, when Dawn of M is being compared to Thriller, that might produce quite a bit of an halo effect for Dawn of M and will reflect positively on Dawn of M. And so it allows the product that is being compared to co-opt some of the reference inherent legitimacy. And there's quite some research on kind of mimetic behavior that kind of gets at this legitimacy transferring effect. But we should also acknowledge, especially when the products that are being used as the referent are very successful prior products, then it's quite likely that the focal product and its firm might be incapable of approximating the referent in terms of its quality, its features. And so the focal product might very well be viewed as inferior to the referent. And so that might reflect negatively on the focal product, potentially influencing its performance in a negative fashion. So these are the three broad questions that we will explore empirically. So who gets compared? Who do they get compared with? And then when a comparison is made, what are the implications on evaluation and performance? And we are exploring this in the market for digital PC games released on Steam. I'm really quite trying to shake the video game label, but I just can't quite, and so I keep coming back to this setting. And so Steam is the leading platform for digitally distributed PC games. It was founded in 2003 by the company Valve. And in 2005, the platform was opened up to externally developed games, and it's really taken off quite exponentially since then. It's market leading on Windows, Mac, Linux, so pretty much all the big operating systems. And we've been able to collect data on all these games that are released on Steam, both through the Steam API. They have a public API that you can access or could access, as well as Steam Spy, which is kind of a market analytics service specifically focused on the Steam platform. And so we've collected from these data sources information of over more than 10,000 games released between 2005 and 2016. And the vast majority of those, more than 99%, are published by third-party developers, i.e. not by Valve. And I'll talk a bit about kind of the data sources and the exact variables. But one thing that will be important here is we've collected data on the game tags that have been submitted by the publishers when they release their game onto the platform. And these game tags, and I'll talk more about them in a minute, provide us with really rich information about what these games look like, feel like, what their relevant themes are, and what their product features are. And so we're going to use those game tags to better understand how similar particular pairs of games are. To identify which games are being compared, we have collected all the PC reviews from two leading reviewing websites, so GameSpot and IGN. These are two of the biggest websites when it comes to reviewing video games. They employ critics, and so there are professionals working for these sites, and they review most of the games that are being released. And so what we do is we collected all the reviews for all PC games written on these two platforms, and then we link that with the information on our games on Steam. And we have a total of 4,677 expert reviews between 2005 and 2020. So we expand our timeline for the reviews by a few more years relative to our timeline for Steam, because it might take time before a game is actually used as the referent. And so we want to be mindful of that. And so we have just over 2,500 reviews published on IGN and just over 2,100 reviews published on GameSpot. And broadly, when we read those reviews, about 913 of them contain a mention to another game. And about 200 of the games that are released on Steam are actually mentioned in the review of another game. And in total, that makes for about 631 mentions, because some games are mentioned more than once. There are certain hit games that are a bit more popular when it comes to being a reference material. So the frequency of the mentions, when we map that onto the year of the release of the games, it pretty much tracks the number of games being released on the platform. So we don't see any weird patterns in the data there. So we see an increase, and that increase kind of maps onto the increase of games being released on Steam. And to give you another idea of what these mentions look like, so here is a reviewer for GameSpot, and he or she writes, "Portal succeeds in building an engaging and humorous world, whereas Cube feels like the video game equivalent of doing homework." You know, knowing the target audience for these type of products, that is not a glowing endorsement for Cube. And so already there we're starting to see that maybe these comparisons can be quite negative, and we'll explore that further. All right, so let's talk a little bit about game tags and how we get at product similarity. So when you make a game and you want to release it on Steam, you are prompted to select up to 20 tags out of a potential list of 390 tags that is created by the platform. So there's various types of tags. I think roughly there's 3 categories of tags. One gets at genres, one gets at product features, and one gets at themes and vibes, if you will. And so then when you go into Steam as a user, you see a tag profile like this. So zombies, co-op, multiplayer, first-person shooter, action. And then I'll give you a bonus question and pop your answers in the chat if you can guess which game this is for. If there's any gamers in the audience, I'm pretty sure some of you will get it right. So these tags are quite a cool conceptual representation of what a game looks and feels like. And they're also important for the platform. They're also important for Steam. So This comes directly from Steam's developer documentation, where they write, in addition to helping Steam users quickly learn about your game, text helps Steam determine where your game should be displayed to customers. So this information is used in its discovery algorithm. It's used in kind of how Steam kind of breaks up the market into smaller segments. And so it's really quite important information. And as I mentioned, these tags are a reflection of a game's features and style. Here we see some information revolving around 3 different games: Fallout, Mass Effect, and Portal. So 2 of these games, for example, have the tag "Choices Matter." Mass Effect, which is very well known for its decision wheel, and Fallout 3, which is another game in which you kind of have to make certain decisions. And so what we do is we code for all the potential tags that are out there, which tags a game has, and that then allows us to calculate the Euclidean distance between every game. And what we also do is, before we calculate that distance, we weight all of these tags and their combinations by commonality, so that rarer combinations of tags are given greater weight than more common combinations of tags. And so, as I said, I think there's 390 tags, and you can have up to 20 per game, and on average games have 9.15 tags. And then, kind of bringing it back to these reviews, we also see that there's quite some coherence between the tag profile of a game and what reviewers write about. So here, in Fallout 3, we see that the critic says, while the dialogue system doesn't quite take the cinematic leap that Mass Effect did, it brings so much depth that the simple illicit responses become quite powerful. So here we see both that choices matter tag is kind of reflected in this quote by talking about responses, but we also see that Fallout is being compared to Mass Effect, which has the same tag, which have the same tags. And so there's coherence between what we observe in the tag vector and what these reviewers talk about, even though that these reviewers might not directly observe the tag vector. All right, so which games get compared? So I have a lot of empirics to get through. This is quite a substantial project, but hopefully you can stay with me. So first, it's a simple probit model at the game level, where we correct for the fact that not every game is in fact being reviewed. And obviously, in order to be compared to another game, you need to be reviewed first. So that's what we're trying to control for. And our dependent variable is there a comparison to any other game made in this review, where we exclude comparisons to other games in the same series, as well as games by the same publisher or developer. We use as predictors whether a game is based on a novel intellectual property, so whether it's not a media adaptation or a sequel, but something that's entirely new, which is kind of the standard measure in the industry for innovation. We again use this information about their text vector to get at how similar is this game to prior games. We have an indicator for whether games are released across multiple genres or just in one genre. We control for the publisher's age and the number of its recent releases on Steam. We have indicators for whether the publisher is an indie publisher, so a smaller publisher, versus kind of an incumbent one. And we have an indicator for whether the game is released with a free-to-play business model versus a paid business model. And then we have genre, month, and year of release fixed effects. And in our first stage, I won't get it too much into this. In our first stage, we kind of create a measure that gets at how many reviews are written this month relative to how many games are released. And when that number is higher, it kind of is an indication that there is more competition for being reviewed. And so that should decrease the chances of actually getting reviewed. So we find that about 12% of the games on Steam were reviewed on either GameSpot or IGN or on both. And of those reviewed, about 30% contained a comparison or a mention. And what we find is indeed that games that are more similar to prior games are less likely to be compared to another. So when you are similar, you have about a 90 percentage points. You have 90% chance of being compared, whereas when you are dissimilar, you have a 35% chance of being compared. So here we see that the reviewer is probably using this as a tool to help consumers make sense of these more novel, uncertain type of products. We also see that indie games, so games by smaller developers, have a slightly higher chance of being compared. And again, this speaks to the fact that indie games might not be as well known as well as their commercializing firms than games by big publishers. And then we have another kind of big finding that free-to-play games are more likely to be compared, and we don't quite know yet how to interpret that. So I'll leave that for your suggestions. Okay, so we know who gets compared. So who are they being compared with when a comparison is made? And so first we'll look at all the games in our sample, and we kind of have a forward-looking dependent variable that indicates whether a game is mentioned in the review of a future game. And here we use as predictors whether their game was received with critical acclaim, so whether it was reviewed very positively itself, whether it was a top performer in terms of its downloads on Steam, plus all the other covariates that I just mentioned, so novelty, similarity, and so forth. And what we find is it's quite rare that you're being used as a reference material in a future review. So only 2.1% of all Steam games are used as a reference material in reviews for other games. And it's particularly games that are innovative, so those that are based on new intellectual property that are that have a higher chance of being used as a reference. We find that games that are reviewed very highly themselves are more likely to be used as a reference. It's about a tenfold increase in the probability when you compare games that are reviewed highly positively versus those that are not reviewed so positively. And perhaps unsurprisingly, when you're a top performer, you're also more likely of being used as a reference. And games by indie developers are slightly less likely of being compared. And so this is a probit model, but we can also use a count model if we want to count for the number of times they're being used as a reference material. And these results are consistent. So kind of the takeaway here is games that are innovative, of high quality, and top performers are the ones that are most likely to be used as the reference, as a referent. And then kind of the second step in this analysis is, I think it's becoming quite clear that these comparisons are not made in isolation, but rather kind of the reviewer might have a particular game in mind when they are reviewing a specific game, and so we should really be looking at the pair level, at the dyad level. So that's what we'll do next. So just to give you an example, the game, the Turing test, the reviewer wrote, the Turing test shines when it combines many of its familiar elements into something new. And if it fleshed out more of these, might have been right up there with some of the mechanics that Portal perfected. So it's compared to Portal. But it could have also been compared to other games that are that could be arguably logical reference, such as Mass Effect, Talos, or Alien Isolation. So why is the comparison made with Portal and not these others? We have two ways of looking at this. One is a conditional logit, so conditional on being reviewed. What is the chance of being compared to any other game in the set that was released before you, or via a two-way fixed effect estimation. And our outcome is that the target game is mentioned in the review of a focal game. And here again, we are primarily interested in how similar the games are, to what extent their genres overlap, and what was the time gap in between the releases between the two games. So what we find is that games strongly get compared based on shared product features. This is by far the strongest predictor. So a 1 unit increase in similarity, which is slightly more than 1 standard deviation, increases the probability that a comparison is drawn by more than 275%. So the more similar two games are, at higher risk they are of being compared by the reviewer. Genre overlap is also a predictor, but it's less strong in terms of its magnitude. And then we also find that when the gap between releases becomes bigger, there is a greater chance of the reviewer making the comparison, which hints at this reviewers using successful products that were released in the past rather than using products that are currently competing with the focal product. And then our last set of analysis is, so how does being compared affect the game's evaluation? So a comparison is made. Now, how does that affect both how the reviewer evaluates your product as well as how it potentially affects your commercial performance in the market? And so this is, for now, this is an OLS regression at the game review level. So some games have multiple reviews because they're reviewed on both IGN and GameSpot. And we're predicting the score, which ranges from 0 to 10. And then the key explanatory variable is whether a comparison is made. But we also control for if the review was the first or the second, what is the overall sentiment of the review through text analysis, and we have reviewer fixed effects. And perhaps quite surprisingly, initially we find no effect of being compared. So when a comparison is made, it doesn't have a strong impact on the score. However, experts, as I've mentioned, experts invoke in these exemplars for different reasons, right? So we've seen a very negative quote for Cube. There's neutral comparisons where, saying, okay, Mag Runner is a bit like Portal. And in some cases, the comparison is very positive. So unlike Portal, though, there's a full cast of characters in Mag Runner that gets in touch via holograms. And so sometimes the focal game is seen as better than the game that it's being compared to. So about 10% of the reviews contain a negative comparison in our sample, 16% contain a neutral comparison, and about 3% contain a positive comparison. So these negative and neutral comparisons are the norm. And we've coded this manually, so we've read through all these reviews. We coded whether we thought it was negative, neutral, or positive. I did it, Richard did it, and we had an industry expert doing it, and then we basically resolved any discrepancies in our codings. And now we see that, if no comparison is made, then the predicted score is about 7.1. But when a negative comparison is made, your predicted score is much lower. It's 6.7. And then neutral and positive comparisons are slightly better than having no comparison whatsoever. And we can project this onto the downloads of the games, and there we too see that the delta from not being compared to having a negative comparison is nearly 100,000 downloads on Steam. So quite a strong negative effect. So I know we're kind of getting towards that 45-minute time mark, but I want to talk to you about a set of analysis that I'm quite excited about. So what we've done next is we wanted to create a bigger sample. So we've loosened the restriction that a game would have to be released on Steam. We just look at all reviews for PC games between 2005 and 2020, I believe. And what we can do then is, since we observe many games twice, once on GameSpot and once on IGN, we can estimate a game fixed effects regression. And particularly when in one of the reviews a mention is made and not in the other review for the same game, that would allow us to get a bit more closer to kind of causal inference, if you will. And so that's what we're doing next. So we're running these game fixed effects models. And what we see there is essentially this negative effect of a negative comparison is very robust. So we're not managing to kill that. And so the effect of being compared negatively to a reference on how the reviewer evaluates you, and subsequently the downloads that you accumulate in the market is quite strongly negative. The effects on the positive effects on neutral comparisons and positive comparisons are a bit less consistent across all these analyses. So the negative effect survives. The positive effect is a bit contingent on which model we use. So do publishers solicit comparisons, right? So one of the main questions that we've gotten when we present this work is, well, maybe the publisher just incentivizes or encourages the reviewer to make the comparison. And so what we've done is, and this is hot off the press, so what we've done is for all the Steam games in which we observed at least one comparison, we've downloaded all of their press releases. So there's a neat database, it's called gamespress.com, that collects all press releases, or as many press releases as they can find for a lot of games. And so we found 1,200 press releases for about 200 games that have at least one comparison. And so what we find is we only found in 10 press releases out of 1,655 game press release mentioned diets that there was actually another game mentioned. So here is an example where we see Project Temporality. It's Portal meets Braid on crack. So here we have two comparisons in one press release. And so that sometimes happens, but the norm is that it doesn't happen. So the vast majority of the times, the publishers and the developers do not encourage these comparisons to be made. All right, so summary of the main results. Evaluators use comparisons as sense-making tools for themselves as well as for consumers for highly novel games. So games that are dissimilar from other games that are out there, games released by indie studios that are lesser known. Evaluators mention games that are exemplars, so games that are innovative, top performing, and high quality. Evaluators are more likely to compare games with greater similarity in product features and to lesser extent similarity in genres. So they compare to similar games that are best in class. And we found no overall effect of being compared, but the negative effect of comparisons has a strong negative effect on review scores and downloads. All right, so we think we study a common and important yet understudied phenomenon, comparisons to other products by information intermediaries. I think we generate novel insights for both sides of the coin. So both the compared and the referent, we have a better understanding of who they are and what the implications for them are in terms of being compared. And I think our approach is quite novel, and it's an approach that opens up new avenues to better understand intermediaries, their practices, as well as how to identify these exemplary products. So there is an assumption in the literature that intermediaries, such as critics, help consumers compare against products, but the mechanism through which that happens hasn't really been studied empirically. And so I think that's a big step that we take with our work. And so even though highly similar products have less reference material available, we find that these are the ones at highest risk of being compared. And when a comparison is made, this tends to be to informative, best-in-class offerings. And so that brings me kind of to the punchline and the title. You know, if you want to position yourself to these products that are very well known, yes, you might be able to inherit some of their legitimacy, but since these products are so incredibly well known, it's much more likely that you're being compared negatively, and so that then also negatively reflects on your performance in the market. So information intermediaries often draw comparisons to prior products, which tend to be best-in-class offerings. Similarity to such exemplars increases the risk of being compared, but these comparisons tend to lead to negative overall evaluations for the product under review. And I'll leave it at that for now. Thank you. So I'll quickly talk about my hobby project. So I have a website, it's called platform-complementor, and it also includes a blog that is published on the website itself, as well as on platformpapers.substack.com. And so what I do here is I basically keep take stock of the literature on platform competition across marketing, management, information systems, and economics. And so the starting point of this website is a review paper that was published in the Journal of Management together with Melissa Schilling. Kind of the impetus was, I often find that it's quite difficult to really understand which papers are included in a review and how they come to particular conclusions. And so my first step was, okay, let's make that set of papers that we rely on for our review paper publicly available. And I created like a Tableau dashboard for that. And so then I think at least some people appreciate it. And so I've kept updating it over time, and it's kind of grown over time to also include some data visualizations and a blog. So yeah, if you want to if you want to kind of keep track of new and cool research on platform competition, then please go to platformpapers.com and subscribe to the Substack. Thank you.